Hi guys, and welcome to my story presentation. So basically my story revolves around gymnastics, which is the sport that I grew up doing, and I feel like the story as a whole has a lot of different components that have kind of like made up the story, but there is like a specific moment that I kind of decided on talking about. So basically just kind of like a background. Obviously I've done it since I was 3 until I graduated high school. And kind of during my high school period, like freshman, sophomore, junior year, I became very like unhappy with the sport, and had a lot of like internal fights based off like if this unhappiness was worth it or if I would be more unhappy without it, if that makes sense. So with that, I believe this was the summer going into my junior year. It was like in August, I believe. And we were vaulting into like a foam pit, if you guys know what that is. And I like climbed out, and my coach stopped me basically and was like, hey, like, is everything okay? And I was just like, yeah, and I kind of like kept walking. And then she asked me again, she was like, Jaden, like, is everything okay? And I just remember like I literally broke down. And part of like from my draft, I vividly remember her saying, Jaden, everything is going to be okay. Just keep putting in the hard work that I see you doing every day, and you will see the results you want. Just hold on a little bit longer. And I think I chose this moment because I just remember so vividly, like right when she said those words, like, just hold on a little bit longer. I knew like my little bit longer was kind of like at a close. Like I felt like I had been holding on by this thread for months now. And she said that, and I was like, no, like I can't. I like kind of had like an epiphany moment, and I was like, no, like I literally can't do that. So in that moment, I kind of like made up my mind, I guess I would say, that I was gonna quit. Now that journey in itself took like months to kind of do, but that moment was significant because I feel like ever since I quit, it was such a big moment because I have grown literally like so much as a person. Like when I did the sport, or at like such a high level when I did the sport, I was super shy, I was a perfectionist, like very pessimistic. And now that I quit, I feel like I'm very optimist. I can go with the flow, but I'm still very organized, and I've still held on to a lot of the qualities that gymnastics has taught me, like being a hard worker and determined and persistent and like things like that. So yeah, that's kind of like a background of my story. In terms of the 4 types of ecological systems that we talked about in class, I feel like my story as a whole kind of deals with the microsystem the most, just because it's like my immediate settings, like family, friends, but I feel like it was mostly internal, like with myself as the immediate setting, just kind of like debating on what to do, a lot of internal conflict, things like that. And then the mesosystem, the text described it as like the settings that the microsystem kind of take place in. So for this, I feel like it would honestly be like gymnastics as an institution is what kind of like caused me to get to where I am today, if that makes sense, and like the gym and just like USA Gymnastics. I feel like it's the institution that kind of like took place within. The macro system is like the interactions with like cultural norms, and I feel like I didn't realize at the time how much of an effect that actually did have on me in my decision. So it kind of goes with exosystem in terms of like an indirect influence. Like at the time I didn't realize how much of an influence I had, just because growing up my family norm was like we did like highly competitive sports, and like the goal was like college for it. And so I didn't realize that at the time, like a big part that was holding me back was like I didn't know how to like live and find things to do and like have a place, not necessarily within my family, but kind of without partaking in like that huge norm and value that my family holds, because we were so like sports or whatever. So yeah, I just feel like it had at the time an indirect influence, but now looking back at it, like it had such a huge influence on that. So yeah, those are kind of like the 4 systems. In terms of like a second concept, I chose intersectionality, which I believe was from week 3. It was by like Kimberly Crenshaw, I think was her name. But essentially, in the past, I've heard of intersectionality kind of being like how your identities and how they intersect with each other, but she described it as like how your identities make you vulnerable in like the certain moment, so that can like change obviously from scenario to scenario. But I feel like as a whole through I related it because like at the time when I did gymnastics, like I said, I was like a perfectionist. I was very persistent, and gymnastics is a sport that you literally get judged like how perfectly you can do things. So in the moment it made me like obviously determined and hardworking to succeed, but at the time like it made me super vulnerable because I couldn't celebrate like the little wins, which I think is what made me to be unhappy. Like I could be like, oh my god, like yeah, I did this for the first time, but then I'd be like, oh, it wasn't perfect, so it wasn't good enough kind of thing. Which I think overall kind of drained me mentally. So I feel like in the moment it made me very vulnerable in terms of my identities in the moment in gymnastics, if that makes sense. And then in terms of like questions with kind of what I literally just said, kind of obviously my paper went into more detail, but what areas seem to be needing to be developed further. And then I'm curious if like my class concepts, like the ecological systems and then the intersectionality, if they relate to the story and to the class content, would be my main questions. So yeah.